Hello, my name is Professor Matthew Schmidt, and I'd like to welcome you to genetics. I'm honestly very excited to be able to go on this journey with you through one of the most important, integral, and evolving fields of biology. I really believe that not only will we learn a lot, but I think we can even have some fun along the way. Before we get into the material, it's very important, in my opinion, to sort of set a context, to get some background information, to think about what the course is, what lies ahead, and also to put ourselves in the right frame of mind for approaching it. As we're going to see, it may be obvious, but I found that it's not always. I mean, the whole of biology really is one integrated, seamless. It's everything that there is about life, perhaps obviously. Now that's a massive amount of information, and we're getting a lot more of it all the time. So we have to break it up into chunks, and one way of looking at it is that those chunks are courses, and those courses are not all designed the same way. They don't require the same exact approach. I'd like to submit to you guys that while you may have noticed there is some overlap in some of the biology courses that you've taken. Overlap isn't always good, but I think it can be good depending on if it reinforces things from a different angle, etc. So I'd like to give you my idea of how some courses are set up and relate that to how genetics is set up. For example, there are several courses, the central theme of which is that they're designed according to a view of the structure and function, which is a very important thing in biology, of either one or several levels of hierarchical organization. So a course that perhaps you might be familiar with that is like this is anatomy and physiology. Cell biology you could also put into this logically. So cell biology is about sort of everything you ever wanted to know about the cellular level of things. Whereas in anatomy and physiology, you sort of hierarchically, as you can see in this picture here, we're starting off with even to the point of atoms and molecules and building them together into ever more complex structures. Cells, and then cells coming together to make tissues, tissues making organs, organ systems, and ultimately the organism. And you can even go higher than this, or in theory lower than this. But really, while anatomy and physiology studies structure and function, it really has to be understood in this hierarchical way. Or if you wanted to start with the whole organism, you could think of breaking down that organism into a bunch of organ systems and then organs, and getting more and more small, if you wish. So that, in other words, you have to sort of understand what a cell is before you can fully understand structures that are made up of other cells. So that's one way to do it. Another way is from the point of view of one type of organism. So for example, these classes, they're certainly good classes. I think that it's a little less likely these days that you may have taken zoology or botany, the study of animals or plants, but microbiology is a course that I also teach. And in it, it's sort of like, again, everything you want to know, but in this case, it's just about bacteria. We don't want to talk about, let me rephrase that. It's about microorganisms. Bacteria are a large group of those, so are viruses, so are a variety of other things. But we're not talking about pine trees, and we're not talking about giraffes. It's all microorganisms. Now, in the context of looking at it that way, we might speak about microbial genetics. We might speak about biochemical reactions or metabolic reactions that are unique to microorganisms, for example. So I believe that would be healthy type of overlap, right? There may be things that you learned in an anatomy and physiology class that are now, granted, anatomy and physiology is usually not talking so much about bacteria or microorganisms, but even if you took cell biology, you'd have certain knowledge about cells. Now we're looking at it from the point of view of a particular type of cell. So I think of this as like an X and a Y axis, and you're sort of, there's an overlap that's a healthy overlap if you sort of can look at it from a different perspective. So we have some pictures here of rather beautiful pictures of a parrot representing zoology, a flower, and a rather interesting photosynthetic microorganism. But saving the best for last, of course, a lot of classes are organized according to, they look at biological processes that apply to all living things. So let's sort of distinguish this from the other two approaches. We start, in one of them we're only talking about a particular type of organism. The other, we're looking at the hierarchical arrangement of things. Here we're saying it applies to everything. It's a process. So for example, biochemistry, evolutionary biology, and of course genetics. So in genetics, well, we're going to obviously be talking quite a bit about genetics in the near future, but genetics, if you really want to distill it down to its most simple form, it's about biological information. That's it. Now, when I say that's it, that doesn't imply there isn't a lot to know about that. But my point is, it could be about molecular genetics, DNA molecules and how they interact with other molecules. It could be about transmission genetics or heredity, why my eyes are blue and I have no hair, and how that may have been transmitted to me from my parents. We could even talk about population genetics. You see, there's all these different levels, anything about biological information. We might be talking sometimes about people, we might be talking about fruit flies, we might be talking about fungi. It doesn't matter because we're thinking about the process, which, believe it or not, is similar in a lot of ways regardless of the organism that you're discussing. So when you approach this genetics course, think of it as it's all about information, right? And if you've had other classes before, it's fine if you haven't. But if you've had cell biology or maybe microbiology, it's really a good idea to try and take what you know from those other classes and hopefully integrate them. Since we've discussed three approaches here, I do look at it as sort of an X, Y, and a Z axis. In other words, there's three sort of approaches, and I'm not saying there couldn't be any more, and they're all trying to get at something from a little bit of a different way. And each of those ways is a valuable way to get at something. The more information you have coming from different viewpoints, and I mean sort of in your global biological life, and the same goes for other sciences as well, the better it's going to be. But just to bring it back down to earth, of course, we're going to be focusing on genetics here. I'm going to give a very broad overview of genetics right now. I am sure a lot of you have some information about it already. I also want to say that I don't want you to panic or anything, but this is one of the few biology classes where not just mathematical skills come into play, but in particular statistical and probability type skills are very important. Don't panic, because certainly statistics is not a prerequisite to taking genetics. But you are going to have to learn, at least in certain parts of the course, to think in a certain different way. And if there are some skills you need to acquire with respect to math, we're going to do our best to help you. If you require outside help, obviously that's fine as well. But it's one of the things that makes genetics unique is a reliance on, or I should say, a big part of the course has to do with analysis of data, but of a very specific type of data, and about making predictions based on data and your understanding of a situation. So let's just do a broad overview to get us all primed up and excited. Genetics is the study of biological information, as I said. Now, a couple of things that you may well know, and that's fine if you do. Genetic information is encoded in the famous DNA molecule, and a chunk of information, usually about a particular trait, is what's called a gene. And obviously gene and genetics come from the same root word. Usually a gene specifies a certain trait, and what that also means is that it specifies a particular protein molecule, often an enzyme which is directly responsible for the trait that's in question. Now, protein molecules, it may not be obvious, but they're really the workers. They primarily determine in the most direct